Hey everybody, and welcome to my weekly live stream. Hope you're all having a great Thursday so far. And we're back for another week. It's been so fun doing these live streams every week. Thank you guys for being here, especially those of you who are here early. I know I'm an hour earlier than I normally do these streams. I decided to go live early for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that it's very hot in Los Angeles today, and it's going to be very hot for a while. So I'm gonna have to figure out how these streams are gonna go, just because I really cannot do a stream with an air conditioner on. It's just too loud, but without the air conditioning on, it gets pretty hot. So I decided to do the stream an hour early. We're gonna see how it goes. I'm sure it's still gonna be warm by the time this thing is over, but we're gonna make it work. So hello everybody, and thank you guys so much for being here. So today is gonna be a lot of fun. Talking all about early cello repertoire. So I'm going to just wait a second as the notifications roll out for people to get here, rosin up my bow a little bit, and then we'll talk about what we're going to do today for the live stream. Other than watch me get overheated on stream, which is absolutely going to happen. Hi everybody, hi Randy, hi Kevin, hey guys, thank you for being here. And I would like to shout out Randy, who sent me these Ortiz Ricercars that I am going to be playing today. They fit perfectly in what I was planning on doing for this week. So we're going to get into some of that stuff too. So I think the way we're going to go about it, my cat Daisy's getting settled. We might hear some crinkles of her going into her paper box bag situation. It's a cardboard box that has paper in it because she likes the crunches. So if you hear any crunches, that's just Daisy getting comfortable. So let's see, before we get into today's topic, if you are new to the channel, welcome. I am Emily, I play the cello, that's the name of the channel. I play mostly historical cello in the Baroque style. I specialize in music from roughly 1600 to 1750, though today we're going to see some stuff right a little bit before that, but mostly in the 17th century for today. And I'll be playing on my historical replica with gut strings tuned to A415, so it's going to be a very historical stream today especially. Sometimes I've done some modern playing, some later classical stuff, but today we're really getting into the older stuff, which a lot of you who've known me for a while know this is my favorite repertoire, is the early stuff. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about it, play some of it, and of course I'll always be doing live Q&A. That's a big part of what these streams are about, is just interacting with you guys and answering your questions. So if it pertains to the repertoire, great. Though I have to say, I'm going to be talking about as much as I can about this repertoire, so if you have a very specific question, I may not even be able to answer it. So you do not have to limit the questions just to the topic of the live stream for today. I always take all sorts of questions, but just when I do the playing, it will be within this theme of the early 17th century stuff. So on some of the previous streams that I've done on the weekly live stream, let's see if we can recall them all. Last week was kind of just a mix of solo Baroque cello repertoire from both early classical, high Baroque as we call it, so that's like, 18th century, solo box, stuff like that. So last week was kind of a mix. I've done some playing of duets with myself with a pre-recorded part. I did one on social media and technology for classical musicians. We've done all sorts of stuff on these live streams now that they're happening every week, and I'm just blasting through them. So if you like these live streams, you can definitely check out the previous ones. They're all up in the live stream playlist on my channel. And if you want to learn more about historical string playing and about some of the stuff we're talking about here, there's a whole instructional videos playlist that you can just dive into and start to really learn about. Some of those videos are pretty old now. It's funny because I get comments on my 4-year-old videos of people kind of commenting like it's present day. It's like, do you not see that it says 2015 on the date of when it was posted? But so some of these videos are a couple years old, but obviously we're talking about music that's hundreds of years old, so the information has not changed over the last 5 years. So there's still great resources to check out. And then if you just like my playing, there's tons of videos of me playing cello, of course, on the channel too. So I encourage you after the live stream to dig into the rest of my catalog if you're intrigued by some of this stuff. Yeah, so we're going to talk. Alejandro mentioned something about how the cello was sort of thought of in the 17th centuries and the 16th century, especially. Um, yeah, because really we study violin family instruments, which we consider to be like violin, viola, cello, and the upright bass. Violin family instruments, we really talk about starting in the 17th century. 16th century is a little bit pre-violin family. So we're going to talk all about that as I get into the repertoire. And people, you can always, if you want to fact check me or correct me on something, some of this stuff, I research, or like I went and checked a couple dates so that I would have dates for all the composers that I'm going to be playing today, just since we are very focused on the actual timing of this music. So I did make sure to get all those dates written down before the stream. But some of this stuff is just things I learned during my schooling, which was many years ago at this point. So if I ever miss a fact or say something that's a little off and you are like a fact brain and you know the info, throw it in the chat or in the comments. I don't mind being corrected if it's respectful. So I'm not claiming to be an encyclopedia here. I am just a person, a musician who has studied this stuff and knows a bit about it. But I love the conversation, and some of you guys in my audience are so knowledgeable, even more so than me at times, so feel free to share your information. We're all here to learn. So the cello itself, which is of course what I'm playing today, really came to be, more so in the 17th century. What we had before the cello, and continued through the time of the cello, and still exists today, but is not as prominent, is an instrument called the viola da gamba, which is part of the viol family, not the violin family. Viol is spelled V-I-O-L. So the viol family and the violin family were string instruments of different categories. The viol family instruments usually had 6 to 7 strings, so not just the 4 of the violin family, and they were fretted instruments as well. And back in those days, the frets were just made from gut, the same way the strings are, and they're just tied on the fingerboard. So they were fretted instruments with more strings, and they were played with what's called an underhand bowing. And so their up bows and down bows were actually reverse from what the overhand bowing does. But a lot of times when we talk about 17th and 18th century repertoire, we refer to the strong weak principle, and we can apply the strong weak to up bows and down bows. So that's the way that you can kind of get the viol family and the violin family in sync, especially if you are actually playing together. If the sections are ever near each other, the bows are like crisscross, not going the same direction, but that's because on the gamba, the viol family instruments, the up-looking stroke, which is, what do they call it? Now it's escaping me what it's called. Push and pull, maybe? The stroke that comes inwards is the stronger stroke, whereas when you play overhand in the violin family, the stroke that goes in is the up bow, and that's the weaker stroke. So little things like that were some big differences. And then the viol family instruments were not tuned in fifths. They were tuned in fourths with a third, very similar to a guitar. So this early stuff that I'm going to start with, which is going to be these pieces by Ortiz, those are more likely intended for a viol family bass viol, viola da gamba instrument, not a cello. But especially in the 21st century, if you are playing a historical cello, you're going to probably start to dabble a bit in gamba repertoire, just certain things. And we are not the instrument, but that doesn't mean we can't get a very close sound and approach and still play the music well. Even though I love historical performance, I love learning about these playing techniques and applying them. I actually always liked it because I found it more liberating, and I know there's a misconception that learning about the historical way of approaching music is more limiting because there's more rules and this and that. But it's not about how many rules there are. It's about understanding the context of the music, which can actually be very liberating and freeing when you understand it. But because we are not, citizens of the 17th century, we are not immersed in that musical culture, so it's just really important to study it and learn about it and listen to recordings from people who have done amazing work, like Jordi Savall is one of my favorites. I always talk about him. Listening to great recordings, not to imitate, but to get yourself in the sound and the language of this era so that we can make informed musical decisions that suit the time period rather than just slapping on our modern aesthetic on something gorgeous from the past that could be, it's like, imagine if they went into like the Sistine Chapel on a regular basis, and they were like, we've decided that teal is the color of the season, so we're just gonna repaint this with some teal because we like teal now. It's like, no. Amazing works of art from the time period should be in the box of the time period. If the artist is not alive, it's not our responsibility. It's not always the best for us to modernize. I think whenever we're modernizing something, it should be from a place of knowledge, not from a place of, it's not good enough as it is, so let me modernize it. I don't think that ever works. I don't think it's respecting the integrity of the art should always come first. That doesn't mean you can't be creative. I think they were very creative in the 17th and 18th centuries, like more than we can ever imagine, because all we have remaining is treatises and books and texts, when they were writing things down and being serious. But, we hear the stories of these composers and these performers in their era, and some of these guys were wild and crazy, and there's no way that they were playing in this very stiff, rule-following way. But they were taught music in such a way that they had a foundation, they had structure, they understood what their musical options were and stuff like that. So really when we study early music, we're just studying to kind of be where the composers and performers of that time period, what they had learned, because our modern day music education just doesn't really cover things the way that they did back then. We have like a very 20th century approach to classical music, and so when you want to play this old music and you want to play it more like it was really played, it's good to just kind of immerse yourself in that world. So that's just my little beginner talk on some of this stuff. Yes, and I don't know when this came in, but I believe I did say the frets on the gamba, which were made of gut. Interesting, frets on the cello also would be cool to have. I mean, kind of convenient. Though it's interesting, we tend to think of frets as like automatically means you're in tune, but that's definitely not the case. And I know from gamba players, they have to actually tune their frets, meaning because the fret is just a wound gut around the fingerboard, it's not like glued in place, you actually do have to sort of move them around and get them tuned and stuff. So it's kind of different than what we consider a modern day fret to be. So a couple more things about this early repertoire before we start playing some of it. So especially in the earlier part of the 17th century, I've shown on the live stream before what some of these old manuscripts looked like, and I do tend to use what's called a facsimile part, or a part that has the original handwritten copy. I've shown Anna Magdalena's Bach many times, but I'll show it again just as a refresher. This is 18th century though, so and so even though this is sloppy and not the easiest to see, you can tell it's still our same style of notation that we're familiar with. In the 17th century, a lot of the things that I'm going to be playing off today are actually going to be in modern print, and I will show you why that is. So in the 17th century, I believe it was because they had movable type, and they had like a typewriter that would paste each note with the lines of the staff. Like that was kind of their way of putting music down other than handwriting. So if you guys are able to see some of this, the biggest difference here of this 17th century music, I hope this is somewhat, is that they do not beam together the 8th and the 16th notes. It's just one little flag coming off of them, or two little flags, and every single note is on its own. Which means for sight reading, or even just playing at all, it's really pretty difficult because we're not seeing groups of 8th notes beamed together, 16th notes beamed together. It's like every note on its own. So that's why a lot of people for the earlier 17th century repertoire that was printed that way will just use a modern print. So I'm not claiming to be doing everything 100% by the historical book, but I think it's a fair compromise for this repertoire. Okay. So before we get into the music, as always, the playing is going to be pretty informal. I'm going to be playing like a short selections and then stopping and checking in the chat for questions and just kind of talking. So it's not like a formal concert environment today. And was there anything else I was going to say? I usually do some warm-ups when I do play, so I think I will just do a couple of warm-ups before I get into some of this and talk about some of the bow strokes and things that I like to think about when playing this repertoire, because like I've said, many times, 17th century repertoire is probably my favorite. It's definitely more obscure, less melodic, a little hard to make sense of musically sometimes, like it's not everybody's favorite. Especially the unaccompanied works can feel maybe a little lacking to some people's ears. But I've always really found the repertoire interesting. I like the challenges that are presented with how to do phrasing and how to make it interesting when it's on the page, maybe on the more simple side. So I've always actually enjoyed that about the earlier rep. So let's get a little warmed up. And again, I'm taking any and all questions today, so you can throw them in the chat anytime, and I'll be checking back in there. And get tuned up. My strings are also going to go out of tune because I got this room nice and cool before the stream started, and now the air conditioner is off, and it's going to be raising like 1 degree in here probably every 5 minutes, so thank you for bearing with me. Anything else I was going to say? Let's just do a couple scales and get warmed up. First, I'm going to do my bow stroke that I always do to warm up, which is my long, short, short. I do it to get my fingers moving. For Baroque playing, almost all the expressiveness comes from the right hand, so having the fingers loose and warmed up makes a big difference. Let's try that again. Is a fast 16th note stroke, because you're going to notice pretty much the most virtuosic thing they did in the 17th century was fast separate bow 16th notes. So we did not see a lot of long slurs. That's much more 18th century. And super, super high positions we didn't really see either. So virtuosity came from a fast separate bow stroke. So I'm going to do another scale with that just to kind of warm up my 16th notes. I wanted to go on the C string a little too. Okay, and somebody asks which temperament I prefer for this repertoire. I wouldn't say I think in specific temperaments when I'm playing unaccompanied. If I'm playing with a keyboard instrument that's tuned to a temperament, that's a different story. But I would say in general, a mean tone type temperament for this, like a 6 comma mean tone, quarter comma mean tone, something like that is kind of what I generally shoot for. But again, on an unaccompanied instrument with no frets and stuff like that, I can't say I'm snapped into a temperament. But a mean tone type temperament is generally what I go for. And I guess before we start playing, I do want to say, of course, I do accept tips and donations for these streams. It is, of course, not required. This stream is free no matter what. But if you would like to support me or you find the stream interesting, helpful, educational, whatever, you can throw me a donation. I updated the stuff down there. That's also why I'm mentioning it. The GoFundMe from the previous streams is still live. It's still up there, and I think it's still linked in the description. But I just set up the cool PayPal link that's like simple and easy. As you can see, the one that's there we go. The one that's all the way over there is the PayPal link, and I had the Venmo last time too. So if you want to send me something with no fees on any end and just keep it simple, you can do a Venmo or a PayPal, or you can visit the GoFundMe. You can also pledge to join my Patreon. My Patreon supports the whole life of the YouTube channel. My Patreon is also linked in the description of the video if you want to learn more about that. I'll talk more about that stuff at the end, but I just wanted to mention that stuff is down there if you guys feel so inclined. But thank you for just being here and watching, regardless. So what I'm going to start with was again submitted by Randy, who's been watching the streams. These are Ricercars by Diego Ortiz, who was a Spanish composer. I believe he died in Italy, so that he's we think of his music as Spanish, though. And really, this is 16th century. So this is kind of pre-cello repertoire, but it would absolutely be played on something like a viola da gamba. I actually do know Jordi Savall's gamba recordings of these Ricercars a little bit. I remembered them from the past. And these are brand new to me. I had never played or performed them, and I was just sent these recently, so I'm super happy I'm going to be kind of half sight reading, just getting to know the pieces, but I thought it would be a really cool way to start off, since it's the earliest stuff. It is written in bass clef, again, because it would be very playable on a gamba. It does work decently on the cello, especially in the 16th century. I don't even think the gamba was doing the most crazy virtuosic stuff. You know, that all sort of came into the later part of the 17th century, going into the 18th century. So virtuosity had a different meaning, especially in these days. And Ortiz, we don't even have his exact birth and death dates, but I do believe that these Ricercars that I'm about to play were published in 1553. So this is absolutely the earliest thing that I can practically play and that we're going to hear on the stream. So I thought it'd be interesting to start with this and then work into some 17th century stuff, a lot of which I've, played and recorded before. So starting with these Ortiz, and the one other thing I should mention is the Ricercar, which you're going to hear me talk about. It has a lot of different spellings and pronunciations based on which composer and which country they're from, but the Ricercar in general is a somewhat improvisatory sounding movement, similar to the idea of what we think of as a prelude, like something that starts off and is kind of free, maybe involves something that sounds almost like you're tuning the instrument, things with open strings and stuff like that, and almost everything I'm playing today is some form of Ricercar. I actually just read, when I was doing a little research on it, the Ricercar is the longest surviving type of piece. My cat just got up and it distracted me. We can't see her right now, though, because she's down there on the floor. So it's one of the longest surviving, genre's not the word I want to use, but type of pieces that exists in the world is the Ricercar. So you'll be hearing me talk about Ricercars a lot, and that's why all these pieces, even though they're going to be a little different, they're going to have a similar feeling because they're all the same type of piece. Pretty much all of them will be Ricercars today, pretty sure. Okay, so let's get into it. And now that I see that someone's given me a thumbs down, I'd like to encourage you all to give me a thumbs up if you're enjoying the video. And if you're not enjoying the video, you can just let me know why. You don't have to click the thumbs down. But I know that the mean people like to remain anonymous. Okay, so let's get into some of this Ortiz to start and kind of get immersed in what some of this earlier music sounds like. And again, these are still new to me, so anyone who knows these pieces really well may catch a mistake or two. We'll see how it goes. So this is the first Ricercar by Ortiz. So one of my favorite things about this early repertoire is we really stay in the bass range pretty much all the time. Like, my favorite thing about the early repertoire for a bass type instrument like the cello is that we really get to play in our real range. Like, one thing I didn't really like about studying cello professionally is I liked, playing in orchestra, playing chamber music, and playing on the lower strings, and then you get into solo repertoire, and everything is just going up and up and up, and it's about higher positions and thumb position and this and that, and it's kind of like, I played the cello because I like the low notes. Like, I even have students, when I teach them from the beginning, from the ground up, and I teach them all the strings, and we learn a D major scale, and maybe we learn a C major scale so they can play on the bottom, and then we start moving into repertoire, which I use, like, the Suzuki books, and they're like, why am I only playing on the top two strings? Like, I want to play on the bottom strings. Like, I want to play with the cello. And it's like, yeah, when you play solo music, you only play on the top two strings, because that is kind of the reality in most repertoire. But in this early music, especially 17th and this 16th century stuff, we get to really play on those lower strings, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. So I'm going to do one more. I'm going to do the second one as well of Ortiz before we move into some other stuff. So let's just get into that. And there we have the second Ricercar by Ortiz. So a big thing with 17th century music is trying to make sense of the phrases because they really don't sound like melodies that we're used to. So, Daisy, you want to come up here? See, it's like some live streams, Daisy's like asleep in the other room, and some she's a constant distraction. And today it's a distraction. We'll get her on the stream before it's over so everybody can look at my cat. But back to the music. So figuring out how to do the phrases, because when you look at the line or the measure, a lot of times there's phrase breaks somewhere in the middle of the measure, and to the naked eye, it wouldn't look like anything. So that's why it's so important to kind of know this repertoire, listen to recordings, listen to a lot of it. So it's not just about, oh, I heard a recording and they did the phrasing like that. It's more about, I've heard a zillion recordings of pieces from this period, and I understand that when there's a phrase like that, we group these together, and so on. So that's, I think, why it's so important to kind of study, so that we can, they, of course, when they were all these composers, the performers, they were trained in music in such a way that they knew these rules. They were just innate to them. Whereas for us, we don't learn all of this stuff in our classical music education, especially for the earlier repertoire. So it's really important that we do learn it, so that we just play it and we're informed about the music. You know, it's not about controlling our creative side. It's about being knowledgeable about what we're playing. So, oh yeah, Bruno Coxett's amazing. He's got some great recordings. Yeah. Thanks so much, Randy, and thank you for sending me this. I'm really happy to have it, and it was fun for me to play. I love Ortiz. Some of the pieces, like with keyboard and stuff, are just awesome. I actually do have one Ortiz thing, but it really, it needs accompaniment, but it kind of sounds good without it, and I was not planning on playing it today. But now we're doing all this Ortiz talk, and it's just like one of my favorites. So if I can find it in my folder right now, I'm about to just add it to the program for today. Let's see where it could possibly be floating. I have so much. I mean, every professional classical musician has a disturbing amount of sheet music, but it's a lot to deal with. Maybe one day I'll get super inspired and like catalog everything, but it's hard to even know where to begin, honestly. I would love to play that Ortiz, but I really don't know where it is. So maybe I'll have to save it for another 17th century stream rather than start tearing up my whole music library. That can be a separate live stream. Emily goes through her entire music library. One last quick check, just in case it's floating anywhere here. And especially, it's like we have to be so on top of our music libraries, because not even everything, like the editions are not always still in print. Sometimes you photocopy something from a library, and then you can never find it again. So if you lose your photocopy, you like don't have that piece anymore, which is pretty tragic. Even a piece that's like been recorded, but it's like if no one has the music for it anymore except the libraries. All right. Okay, so no luck on the Ortiz, the other Ortiz for today, but we'll do it sometime. So I really shouldn't do an underhand bow on this. This is really like an 18th century model of a bow, but I can show a little what an underhand bowing looks like, because I have played some viola da gamba. I studied it very briefly during my master's on the side. I love the gamba. Again, if anybody wants to loan me a viola da gamba, I will play it and I will make videos of it, so just putting that out there. So an underhand bowing, it's not just like a reverse of the regular bowing. It's kind of more of like, I haven't done it in a long time, but it's sort of more of like a cradling of the bow, like just kind of supporting the bow more flat this way instead of this way when we have it overhand. And we actually, for an underhand bowing, I haven't done it in so long, you touch the hair much more, and you use the weight of the arm in a really like relaxed, you have to really use the arm and the elbow to work the underhand bowing. I don't know how it compares to like German bass bow. It's similar but not the same as far as I'm concerned. But yes, I'll be doing these all overhand, but I think I do a really good gamba impression, like the way I can sound like a gamba or sound in the vein of a gamba pretty easily. So next next up, what I'm going to do repertoire-wise are some more Ricercars, because Ricercars is kind of the theme of the day. Should have put that in the title. Probably do that afterwards. So these are by Degli Antoni. Let's get this focused. This is another precious book that was out of print for a little while. So this was hard to get for a while. This is the shot edition, if that's how you pronounce it. Let's get the glare off. There you go, for anyone who may want to try to find this music. So these pieces, again, they're Ricercars. They're exploratory pieces. Same vein as Ortiz, but about 100 years later. I have the dates on the other page. And there's been some speculation for these pieces that these may have been bass parts and the violin part was lost. Like these were not meant to be solo pieces. I don't know if I buy that or not. There are times where it feels like you're just kind of moving along in a bass line and there's not really much else going on, but I think the pieces can still be enjoyed. Yeah, so these were now published in 1687, but they were likely written 12 years before that. So 1670s, and what do we have for Ortiz? 1553. So we're moving about 100 years in the future right now, but it's repertoire-wise, I think you'll hear some difference, but it's not drastically different. I think Ortiz was kind of ahead of his time. He sort of like set up a lot of the 17th century style. So, and this is very much in the 17th century style. So I don't think you'll hear a lot of difference, but you will see a little bit different. And this was more likely definitely intended for cello, whereas the Ortiz was likely for gamba. But again, remember that even in the time period, if it was in a bass clef, any bass clef instrument would play it. It was not super strict always about which instruments these pieces were intended for. Wow, writing out music by hand, that's real dedication. I did have a friend, a very eccentric friend in grad school, amazing harpsichordist, continuo player. He has not been on my channel or anything like that, so it's not anybody that anybody would necessarily know from this channel, and really amazing musician. I learned a lot from him, but he would sometimes go to the library and write the music out by hand instead of copying it because he felt like he learned the music writing it out. He was also a composer who I feel like composers are just more comfortable sitting down and like writing music and notes on the staff. For some of us who don't do it a lot, it can be like kind of labor intensive, but that's dedication. I mean, that's amazing. And of course, that's what they were doing in these times. They were, of course, writing everything out by hand. So couldn't just take a picture on your iPhone back then, but wouldn't have that been nice? So now we're moving to Degli Antoni. If you like any of these pieces, they were, all the ones I'm going to play today were recorded on my very first album, Bass Sounds, from 2013. And Bass Sounds is on Spotify, iTunes, Bandcamp, wherever you get music, just search Emily Davidson. There's two Bass Sounds. There's Bass Sounds and Bass Sounds Evolved. But the first Bass Sounds is all 17th century music except for the Bach suite. So that's where I featured these pieces. Okay, and this is Ricercar number 12. And that was Ricercars number 12 by Degli Antoni, and I feel that my bow was not the right tightness. I really could not get the contact I wanted there. And that's something about gut strings for sure. With any kind of weather, temperature, humidity, which I already complained about the heat today, it really changes the way the strings respond based on those conditions. So you really do have to compensate with how much you tighten and loosen your bow. Whereas in steel strings, you kind of always know where you want to be with bow tightness in terms of the piece that you're playing. With gut strings, sometimes you have to modify based on how wet or dry your strings are. Thank you, Shirley, for the kind words. And yeah, Randy had mentioned earlier some of these pieces were divisions on vocal music of the time. That was definitely very common. Of course, vocal music has been around probably the longest of anything, before instruments were even really invented. Humans were using their voice. So vocal music was always a big inspiration, I think, for instrumental music. And so a lot of composers did take popular, I forget, I've been out of school too long because then the pieces of information that were so normal to you to remember slowly slip away. But yeah, Ortiz wrote a lot of different divisions over vocal melodies, kind of as studies and exercises, and just different ways that you could ornament on a same melody. Also, we can see now the birds on the TV have turned to squirrels. Are squirrels as peaceful as birds? I'm not so sure. I mean, I do put these on for my cat, and she prefers the squirrels. But, this is not very zen. There's a squirrel tail on the camera. I do love these videos, though. I think they're a fun part of the stream. Okay. There we go. We got birds back on the TV. Yeah, I'm just not getting great response on my strings today, but that's okay. So let's do another one of these Antoni Ricercars. I mentioned how these all these instrumental pieces from this time period really do stay in the bass range, which I like. And we do have to remember, it's when we look at the cello from a 20th century perspective, it's almost we forget sometimes it's a bass instrument. It was made to play the bass lines and the foundation of the music. So in the earlier times of its repertoire, that's what it was doing because that's what it was meant to do. And then it was later with composers even like Barriere, and then of course getting into Boccherini and stuff like that they started to push the limits of what the cello could do. And Barriere is he's an 18th century composer, but he's a good example of someone who kind of studied both cello and gamba and tried to show that the cello could do everything the gamba could do. So in the 18th century, they started pushing on the cello to do more. But in these earlier times, it was about these bass register things, which I enjoy. So let's see, what else did I have for today? Well, we're going to do another one of these Degli Antonis. Let's do this very jolly F major one. This is number 4. Oh yeah, this comment here from Ken about my my right hand arm. Yeah, so really when studying a Baroque instrument full time, it's literal boot camp for the right side. And my teacher who I studied with, Phoebe Carai, who's faculty at the Juilliard School for historical performance, she has this incredible approach to the whole right side. And I was very lucky to study with her full time for 3 years, the last year of my undergrad and the 2 years of my master's, and just get her system down because she really perfected how to have a malleable bow hand. And every day is different, some days you wake up and you're just a little more stiff, but at least knowing what tools are available to you in your right hand is very useful. But when I was training my right hand to learn the Baroque bow and gut string response, I used to do an hour and a half every day at the beginning of my practice session, and an hour and a half of just scales and warm-ups that were just focused on different bow strokes, right hand. An hour and a half before I would do any repertoire or any music, it was just an hour and a half of right hand training. So yeah, I put in the time. I mean, that was in 2010, so that was 10 years ago I was putting in that time, but I definitely did put the time in. Okay, so now this is Ricercar number 4. And I'm going to do my best to get my squawky, overheated cello to make some good sounds. It's like, maybe I need to be looser. What do I need? We'll try this. Now I'm pretty tight. We'll see. Yeah, I have a lot of fun with that one. I think it's just very, like, bombastic. It sounds very bassoon-like almost, so I just like to kind of go all in on it when I do it. So that was Ricercar number 4 by Degli Antoni. And you guys may have noticed now that I've played 2 of these, an interesting thing about these particular Ricercars is that they have a time signature change in the middle. They're in 4, and then they have a 12/8 section in the middle, and then they go back to 4, which is kind of unusual. I haven't noticed that in a lot of pieces like this specifically. Most of the other Ricercars that I play are just same all the way through. Though sometimes they do switch it up from a duple to a triple meter. But all of these, almost all of them, or perhaps all of these Ricercars by degli Antoni do this same time change. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, thank you so much for the super chat, Randy, and for all your support on the live stream so far. I so appreciate it. So let's see, we're already down to the last 7 minutes. Time flies. I think actually what I'm going to do, because I had a lot of pieces selected for this, is I think I'm going to do a part 2 of the early repertoire, because I am kind of like, this is my favorite thing, so it doesn't surprise me that I can do more than an hour stream on this stuff. So I'm not going to get to everything I planned for today, but that's good news. I can use that other Ortiz that I wanted to play today. I can track that down and maybe play that next time. So let's do a couple other little ones, and definitely get in your final questions since we're getting into the last couple of minutes. Next, what I'm going to do is yet another Ricercar, this one by Gabrielli. And there's a lot of Gabriellis, so it gets a little confusing. This is a Gabrielli with 2 L's. And he wrote mostly just some cello music. And these were published in 1689, so what did we say for these degli Antonis? I think this is probably just a little bit later, but roughly, oh no, this is 1687, but likely they were written 12 years later. This is 1689, might have been written around 1689. And it is a little bit more, it feels like it's starting to push into it's the end of the 17th century, I guess we'll say. But so this is Gabrielli's very first Ricercar. It's really famous. I have 2 different recordings of it on my YouTube channel. I've played it in so many recitals. It's just one of my favorites. Now, Gabrielli is kind of his own situation in that he was likely using a cello which was not scordatura. Now, scordatura is a term that we use when we retune the strings to different notes. So not tuning to a different temperament, which means that our pitch levels are just calibrated differently. Like I am playing at A415, but it is still A, D, G, C for my strings. It's just an A415. Scordatura would be if I tuned my A to something else, and I tuned my D to something else. That's called scordatura. What was going on in Gabrielli's time was not scordatura, but he had a cello that likely had a top G instead of an A. So the other D, G, C were the same, but the A was tuned down a whole step to a G. That was considered the Bolognese tuning. That was just a tuning for the cello that was floating around at that time. Scholars can debate about whether Gabrielli was using this tuning or not, but that tuning does lend itself to his Ricercars pretty nicely. And some people may know this tuning with the top string being a G for the Bach's Fifth Cello Suite, which is often played in that tuning as well. It gives an amazing sound to the cello. Personally, I love it. As someone who just likes the lower notes and the lower sounds, I love tuning my A down to a G. I'm not going to do it for today because I would be doing it just for this very short one piece. It's not worth retuning for that. So I'm going to be playing this Gabrielli in the standard tuning, but there is the possibility that you can play it in the Bolognese tuning of tuning your A down to a G. So this is Gabrielli, Ricercar Primo, or number 1. Classic. Love that one. Very popular for a reason. Just great bass line playing. I really recommend the Gabriele Ricercars if you're learning to play Baroque cello. You can play them in your regular standard tuning, or at 415, 440, whatever. You can play it in regular cello tuning. And it just teaches you so much about playing bass lines and just getting into that sound. Gabriele is really great. I did not know Arabic music also used that tuning, but that's very cool. So let's see. We are technically done. That's kind of a nice way to end on that Gabriele. I had more to play, but I think this seems like it's going to lend itself to a part 2. I had some Vitali, which I've done on the streams before. So what did we do today? We did Ortiz, Degli Antoni, and Gabriele. I think that's a great selection for part 1 of our early repertoire. And I will do part 2 where I do maybe some more Antoni because I've got a lot of those. I could do a different Gabriele. I had Vitali, which I did not play today. I'm going to get an Ortiz that is intended to have a keyboard part, but after playing the Ortiz that doesn't have a keyboard part, it doesn't sound any more lacking. So I think I'll do that also next time. So any final questions, throw them in right now. It's amazing how fast this hour goes by. Sometimes when I did live streams before, like when I was doing them once a month, I would go longer than an hour. But I think for doing the weekly, an hour's good. That way it's easy for people to catch up on it if they miss it. If I just babble on forever, it's a lot to get to, and not everyone has all the time to sit around and watch hours of content. So I'm going to cap this one at an hour, but I'm glad you guys enjoyed this. You guys know I love my 17th century stuff, so definitely check out my Bass Sounds album if you want to hear some of these pieces, how I recorded them. I mean, back in 2013, I was kind of a different player in those days. Bass Sounds was my first project after finishing my schooling. It was like I had been in non-stop higher education for 6 years straight, and then suddenly I was out, and it was like, what am I supposed to do? I was so used to recitals and juries and classes and repertoire. It was like I had to make that for myself. So what I did was I created the Bass Sounds album and learned all that repertoire and recorded it myself. It was the first thing I ever recorded myself in that way. And then my brother mixed and mastered it for me. But it was what a project. It was exhausting and very difficult. Had a lot of meltdowns making that album. I've had a lot of meltdowns making all my albums. I think it's just part of the process, but so those are my official recordings of some of these pieces. And then there's stuff peppered through on my YouTube channel also. It's true, right now we have nothing but time, but I feel like people are now sort of settling into normal life, and I know some people are still working from home, so even though working from home typically involves less working than working at the office, it's still working. So thank you guys so much for watching. So again, if you enjoyed the live stream and you want to support me, of course, like every other musician and artist, I was of course affected by this pandemic in terms of, work, being able to go to my students and teach them, since I teach them mostly in their homes, any kind of concerts or gigs. Of course, none of that stuff is happening. So any support that you give me is super appreciated, because we're kind of all trying to figure out the new normal now, especially musicians. And if you want to be more of a team member supporter, definitely check out my Patreon, which I've had for 5 years now, supporting this YouTube channel, making it possible for me to keep bringing you guys good content on a regular basis, being able to make the time for the videos and set everything up and have the equipment. Patreon has been the backbone of this channel, so I always like to thank my patrons for that. If you're new to the channel, definitely subscribe. Check out some of my other stuff that I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. There's always much more information to dive into if you're intrigued by anything you hear on the live streams. This channel has been very active for the last 5 years, so there is a lot of videos up to learn all about this stuff. If you're a classical musician, or even better, someone who plays early music, I'm always looking to feature new people on my channel, or people I've already featured, just people who I love their playing and they're doing great stuff with Baroque and classical repertoire. So if you're interested in being featured on my channel, you can submit an application. It's very simple. You just kind of tell me what you play and what you do. At emilyplayscello.com/collaborators, and I can even help you with the audio and video setup. So if you're intrigued by that, definitely check that out. if you're just getting used to recording yourself and you want to know how to do that and make it sound decent, I have an audio mixing tutorial on my website also, using GarageBand, which most people have free with their computers. So all that good stuff is on my website. You can go to patreon.com/EmilyPlaysCello if you want to join the Patreon community that I have there. Or you can just subscribe to the channel and check me out next week. I think I'm going to keep this time for the live streams, at least while it continues to be really hot, because like kind of the earlier I do it, the better. So hopefully this earlier time worked okay for everybody. But you know, you can always watch the archive if you miss it. Thank you for the comment about how I provide historical context for everything. Yeah, I mean, I'm all about that. Like, the thing about me is, like, I was never, like, so music historian that was, like I could be just a brain in the books. Like, if I had to do too much studying, I'm really bad with numbers, like, memorizing dates and stuff like that. So, like, I could never be, like, nothing but a scholar. Like, I always had to be a performer and a player also. But it was, like, I'm too scholarly to be just a player. Like, when I was only a player, it was like I always knew more than everybody, like about the rep or about the playing style or whatever. But then if I was only with scholarly people, I was more of like a performer who just wanted to play the music and didn't care about the date. So it's like I'm somewhere in between scholar and performer. So I like to try to merge those as much as I can, because they really serve each other, but I never really felt like I fit in perfectly on either side, if that makes sense. But anyway, so thank you guys so much for being here this week and supporting the channel. I hope you're all staying happy and safe and healthy. I think we're going to be past the worst of this whole ordeal soon, I really hope. So I hope you're all just taking good care of yourself, doing what you need to do to be mentally and emotionally healthy and physically healthy as well. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next week on the stream or some other time. Be sure you're following me on social media if you want to know about the streams right away. I always announce them on Instagram and my Facebook page. That's all at Emily Plays Cello. So thanks, guys, and I think I'm definitely going to do a part 2 of this early rep since you guys liked it and I liked it and there was more to play and more to talk about. So part 2 will either be next week's stream or maybe the following week. Depends if I get a brilliant idea for next week's stream. But there will be a part 2 for this early cello repertoire. So, oh, one more question. Let me just get that quickly. When doing A430, do you tune up your Baroque cello, or do you lower the pitch of my modern? It depends on the gig itself and what I'm playing with, because usually when people are making requests about pitch levels, either 415, 430, 440, 392, they typically specify if they want gut strings or not, because my modern cello is, of course, steel strings, and then my Baroque is gut strings. So it would be more about which strings they want, not about the fact that it's 430. I could do 430 on either cello. I think I have done 430 on both. But typically if someone's doing 430, that means they want the period instrument sound and they want the gut strings. So I would likely use my Baroque cello. I've tuned my Baroque cello up to 440 for gigs also. So you just kind of have to do it sometimes. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching and I will see you all next week. Bye everybody.